All right, so have you ever seen a headline online and you're like, wait, is that for real?
Boy, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
That feeling of, is this legit or am I being tricked?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you almost don't even want to click, but it's just so tempting. And then figuring out what's true and what's not, it's like a minefield out there.
Yeah.
And that's what we're diving into today. Disinformation.
And that's a big one.
It really is. We've got a ton of research to unpack, academic papers, expert opinions, you name it.
All the good stuff.
Exactly. We're talking about how to spot disinformation, why it's so darn catchy, and most importantly, what we can actually do about it.
Because you can't just ignore it, right?
No, not anymore. It's everywhere. But, sometimes I feel like I need a PhD just to understand what I'm reading about this stuff.
Well, and to be honest, even the terms we use can be kind of confusing. Like, everyone loves to throw around fake news, but honestly, it's such a loaded term now.
Yeah, totally. It's almost lost on meaning at this point. So what's a more helpful way to think about it?
Well, researchers often use the term disinformation.
Disinformation. Okay, so how's that different?
It's about intentionally false information. It's crafted to mislead, to mess with people's understanding of something.
So it's not just about getting something wrong, it's about doing it on purpose.
Exactly. And that's actually a key difference between disinformation and misinformation. Misinformation is still false, but it might be unintentional.
Okay, so give me an example.
So, think of it this way. Misinformation is like telling someone the wrong directions because you misread the map yourself. Disinformation is giving them those wrong directions on purpose because you want them to get lost.
Okay, I get it. So it's the intent that really matters here. Both are bad, but disinformation is straight up manipulation.
Exactly. And here's the thing, with so much information flying around these days, it's really easy to fall for this stuff.
You're telling me I feel like I'm constantly second-guessing myself.
And you know what? Everyone's vulnerable to this. No matter how smart or well-informed we think we are, our brains can still be tricked.
Wait, are you saying that even I, with my super sleuthing skills, could fall for disinformation?
Even you. There's this really interesting phenomenon called the Moses illusion. Have you ever heard of that?
Moses illusion. Not ringing any bells.
So it's this little trick researchers use. They'll ask people, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark?
Moses. Wasn't it Noah?
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even people who know the Bible story well often miss that mistake. Their brain just kind of skims over it.
Wow, you're right. I probably would have messed that up too. Okay, so what's going on in our brains when that happens?
It's something called knowledge neglect. Basically, our brains have a hard time applying what we already know when we come across new information, especially if it contradicts what we thought was true.
So even if deep down I know something's off, that new information can still make me doubt myself.
Exactly. It's like that prior knowledge gets temporarily put on hold and the new conflicting information takes center stage.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when people share misinformation even when they know it's wrong? Like, that's what I don't get. Why hit that share button if you have even a tiny suspicion it's bogus?
Well, here's where things get really interesting. It's not always about what we believe, but more about what drives us to share.
Okay, I need to hear more about this.
Think about it. You see a headline, and maybe deep down, you're not totally convinced it's true.
Which happens to me all the time.
Right. But if that headline makes you angry or outraged or excited, suddenly you might be more likely to hit that share button without thinking too much about it.
Oh, that is so true. It's like your emotions take over. You just want to get that information out there.
Exactly. Emotions are incredibly powerful, and unfortunately, they often overpower our more rational side, especially when we're scrolling online and things are moving so fast.
It's like our brains go on autopilot sometimes. And nowhere is that more true than on social media.
You got it. And this is where we see a big difference between how traditional media, like newspapers and TV news, handle information versus how it plays out on social media.
Okay, yeah, tell me more about that.
So traditional media, they have these built-in systems, right? Fact checkers, editors, they're like the gatekeepers, trying to make sure that what gets published is as accurate as possible.
It's like traditional media has those built-in brakes, but social media is like flooring it on the Autobahn.
100%. And those algorithms, they're not helping. They just push whatever gets the most engagement, likes, shares, comments. And you know what gets people riled up?
Let me guess. A juicy but totally bogus headline.
Bingo. It's like that old saying, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes.
Man, that's depressing. And then you've got those echo chambers online, right? Where people just see more of what they already believe, even if it's not true.
Exactly. It's like those research visualizations, they map out online communities,
Hmm.
and you see these little islands all isolated from each other. That's what echo chambers can look like.
So even if you're trying to be open-minded, your social media feed might be showing you a very skewed version of reality.
You got it. And that's why it's so important to be really mindful of the information we consume and share. But, it's not all doom and gloom. There are things we can do to fight back against disinformation.
Okay, give me some hope here. What can we actually do?
Well, the solutions usually fall into two main categories. You've got system-level approaches, like laws and regulations, and then there are things we can do as individuals.
Okay, well, let's start with the individual stuff. What can we do right now to make a difference?
One of the most powerful things is something called debunking.
Debunking, like busting myths.
Exactly. But it's more than just saying, nope, that's false. It's about actively replacing misinformation with accurate information and doing it in a way that sticks.
So, like, if someone shares a bogus claim about, I don't know, vitamins, instead of just saying, that's wrong, you'd actually explain why it's wrong, what the science says, maybe link to a credible study.
You got it. It's about giving people the full picture.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually get people to see those debunking messages, especially if they're stuck in those echo chambers we talked about?
That is the million-dollar question. One thing that helps is consistency. Like, if you see misinformation from a friend or family member, don't be afraid to gently correct it and point them towards trusted sources.
So it's about building up that immunity to misinformation over time.
Exactly. Now, there's another strategy called pre-bunking, which is more about prevention.
Pre-bunking, what's that?
So imagine you get a little heads up about a common misinformation tactic, like a logical fallacy or an emotional appeal. Then, when you encounter that tactic in the wild, you're less likely to fall for it.
It's like a vaccine for your mind. I love it.
That's a great way to put it. And the research suggests it can be pretty effective. Of course, there are challenges. Like, people need to opt into pre-bunking. They have to choose to read that article or watch that video explaining those tactics.
Right. It takes a bit more effort than just scrolling through your feed. But what about media literacy? It seems like that plays a big role in all of this.
100%. Media literacy, digital literacy, it's all about giving people the skills to navigate this crazy information landscape we live in.
So being able to spot credible sources, recognize bias, evaluate evidence, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And it's not just about identifying the bad information. It's also about knowing how to find the good stuff.
Which, let's be real, can be tough these days.
Oh,
Anyone can post anything online, regardless of their expertise or, their agenda.
exactly. That's why it's more important than ever to teach these skills. Some schools are starting to integrate media literacy directly into their curriculums.
No, that's encouraging. I wish they'd had that when I was in school.
Me too. But it's not just on schools, right? Parents, caregivers, they all play a role in shaping kids' media habits.
So it's about setting a good example, talking to kids about how to think critically about what they see online.
Absolutely. Making it a normal part of life. But even with all the education and critical thinking skills in the world, we're still swimming in a sea of clickbait,
Yeah.
those tempting headlines, emotional posts.
Yeah, they get me every time.
Right. So that's where those subtle things platforms themselves can do come in, things like nudging.
Nudging. Okay, I'm intrigued. What is that?
Think of it as a gentle steer in the right direction. Like, let's say you're about to share an article. A little pop-up appears asking, hey, have you double-checked the source on this one? Or maybe it shows how many people in your network prioritize sharing accurate information.
Oh, interesting. So it's about making people pause and think before they share.
Exactly. It's not about limiting choices,
Yeah.
but just encouraging a little more thoughtfulness.
I like it. Do these nudges actually work?
The research is still emerging, but there's some evidence that they can make a difference. But it's not a magic solution. It's more like a nudge in the right direction, as the name suggests.
Right, but sometimes that's all it takes. Okay, so we've talked about what we can do as individuals, but what about those bigger picture solutions?
Right, the system level stuff. Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about what we can do as individuals to navigate this disinformation minefield, but what about tackling it on a larger scale? System-level solutions sound like they could be game changers.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about things like legislation, Platform regulations really getting to the root of the issue.
So are we talking about making social media platforms more accountable for the stuff that gets shared on their watch?
That's a big part of it, imagine. Legislation that holds these platforms responsible for, say, demonstrably false and harmful content, or even requiring more transparency about those algorithms,
Hmm.
the ones deciding what we see.
Okay, so less of a free-for-all, more accountability. Makes sense. But isn't there a fine line between, like, regulation and censorship? How do we make sure that these efforts to, combat disinformation don't end up silencing legitimate speech?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's a tough balance. We need to mitigate the harm without stifling free speech. It requires a lot of ongoing discussion and debate, for sure.
It's like walking a tightrope, legally and ethically.
Exactly. And legislation is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
We also need to think about media literacy education and even just fostering those social norms that value truth and accuracy. It's a multifaceted issue.
You mentioned earlier how research has shown a link between exposure to misinformation and actual changes in people's beliefs, even behaviors. That's kind of scary when you think about it. Are there real-world examples of this, like when it comes to, say, health information?
Unfortunately, yeah. One of the most well-known and tragic examples is the spread of misinformation about the MMR vaccine and, that whole thing about it causing autism.
Oh, right. That's been completely debunked, hasn't it?
Totally. Countless studies have shown there's absolutely no link, but the damage was done. That one piece of misinformation, it originated from a single discredited study, by the way, had a lasting impact. Vaccination rates dropped, leading to outbreaks of diseases that were completely preventable.
It's incredible how one piece of misinformation can snowball like that.
It's wild. And we saw something similar with COVID-19 misinformation, people rejecting vaccines, embracing unproven treatments. It's heartbreaking to see the real-world consequences.
It really is. But are there any positive examples? Like, have there been any public health campaigns that have actually managed to combat misinformation and promote healthy behaviors effectively?
There have been some bright spots for sure. One great example is the Truth Campaign. They've been running those anti-smoking ads for decades.
Oh, yeah. I remember those. They were really powerful.
Right. They really understood how to connect with young people. Emotional storytelling, highlighting the tobacco industry's deceptive tactics. And it worked. Teen smoking rates dropped significantly.
That's amazing. It's a reminder that we're not powerless against this stuff.
Exactly. And we can learn from these successful campaigns and apply those lessons to other areas, right? We need to make accurate information just as compelling, as shareable as the misinformation.
That makes a lot of sense. But with so much information coming at us from all directions, it can be hard to know what to trust. What are some red flags people should look out for? Like, how do you tell if a source is unreliable or suspicious?
One of the biggest ones is a lack of transparency. If a website or a social media account doesn't clearly say who's behind it, what their deal is, or where they're getting their information from, red flag.
So if I'm reading an article and I can't find any information about the author or the publication, or if they don't disclose their funding sources, that's a sign to maybe not take it at face value.
100%. Another thing to watch out for is a really strong emotional bias. If a source is all about fear-mongering, outrage, anger, without backing it up with solid evidence, they might be trying to play you, not inform you.
It's like those clickbait headlines designed to get you to click, but the content itself is often flimsy at best.
Exactly. Healthy skepticism is key. And be wary of sources that try to look all official and newsy, but the content is full of inaccuracies.
It's like those imposter scams, but for information. So how can people protect themselves? How do you actually verify information and make sure you're not being duped?
One simple tip that people often overlook is to double-check that web address. Those imposter websites will often use sneaky little variations of legitimate URLs, hoping you won't notice.
Oh, like swapping a .com for a .org or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Also, look for those verification badges on social media. The blue check marks. Those indicate that the platform has at least confirmed the account holder's identity.
Good to know. But even with those badges, it's probably still a good idea to do your own digging, right?
Absolutely. Look for inconsistencies in the information. Does the writing seem off? Do the claims contradict what you've heard from more trustworthy sources?
So trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
100%.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to do a little digging. Cross-reference with sources you know are reliable, like established news organizations, fact-checking websites.
This has been incredibly helpful, but it feels like a lot to keep track of. Are there any tools or resources out there that can help with all of this?
Oh, yeah, tons. There's some fantastic fact-checking websites out there. Snopes, PolitiFact, factcheck.org. They do the hard work for you, debunking those viral claims and providing accurate information.
Those are great. I use them all the time. What about those browser extensions I've heard about? The ones that can flag, like, dodgy websites or misleading content?
Oh, those can be super helpful, especially if you're online a lot. Think of them as your early warning system, alerting you to potential red flags before you click or share.
It's like having a little fact-checking buddy built into your browser. That's amazing. It seems like technology can be both the problem and the solution when it comes to disinformation, right?
You said it. It's definitely made it easier for misinformation to spread, but it can also be used to fight back. It's about demanding better from those tech companies, supporting the development of tools and platforms that prioritize accuracy and critical thinking.
I love that. It's about taking back our power as users and shaping the digital landscape for the better.
Exactly. And that's why conversations like this are so important. The more we talk about these issues, the more we share strategies and demand better, the closer we'll get to a more informed and empowered online world.
That's an inspiring note to end on. This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, and I hope our listeners are walking away feeling, empowered. Remember, knowledge is power, and by staying curious, staying skeptical, and most importantly, staying engaged, we can all play a part in creating a more informed and resilient future.